So, maybe just you've heard some terms before like sustainability, net zero, carbon emissions, even drawdown. I know I used the word drawdown in my last video. And maybe you don't know what these mean. So, buckle your seatbelts because in this video, we're going to cover a lot of ground in 10 minutes. We're going to cover everything that I just said and more. Alright? So put your thinking caps on, make sure they're tight, turned on, and let's get into this. Climate term number 1, carbon. Carbon is a basic building block of all life. Carbon is in you, it's in me, it's in the birds flying outside in the sky, and it's also in our atmosphere. Now, it's normal to have a certain amount of carbon in the atmosphere, but for the past couple hundred years, we've actually been using carbon to make our cars, our planes, our trains, and factories, to make them work. Now, this has been the catalyst for a lot of growth in the world. However, this means that there's a lot of it in our atmosphere right now, and that's no bueno, because too much carbon in the atmosphere causes the Earth to heat up, and everyone knows that's not a good thing. Climate term number 2, emissions. So, think about burning a fire. Think about all the smoke that goes off into the atmosphere when you burn a fire. Those are emissions. Emissions are simply the particles off of things when you burn them. Now, where do they go? Unfortunately, they go to our atmosphere. Now, when you turn a car or a factory or a train or a plane, when you turn these things on, they release emissions. And oftentimes, these emissions are made of carbon. So that's why you might hear someone say, like, carbon emission. That's just combining what we learned with the last term with this one. So, that's emissions, which brings us to our third term, drawdown. Drawdown is the act of taking the extra carbon emissions that are in the atmosphere and putting them back in the ground where they belong. Drawdown is one of the major climate solutions that exist, and it's totally one of my favorite. You can check out companies like Project Drawdown to learn more. They have a huge list on their website of climate solutions that help in drawing carbon down. Companies like Project Drawdown are already working on these solutions and have been for years, so definitely look them up. They have a lot of good things to read. Climate term number 4, net zero. This is a term you'll hear in car commercials, maybe clothing companies will say it, and maybe even restaurants. All it means is that the company is trying to not emit, this comes from the word emissions, they're trying to not emit more than they clean up. Net zero essentially just means companies are trying to produce zero badness for the world, okay? Now, they may do this by planting trees, restoring wetlands, and funding renewable energy projects, which we're going to talk about later in this video. Climate term number 5, regeneration. This is a fun one. So, regeneration is a term that has become more popular in the last couple of years as people have increased the storytelling of climate solutions. So, all regeneration means is just like making the world a better place, okay? You can look up a guy named Paul Hawken. He's super big on regeneration. A good example of what regeneration is, like in practice, is regenerative agriculture. And I'm super excited to make a specific video about regenerative agriculture, but just a quick definition is farming in such a way that heals the soil. It can also draw down, it can also draw carbon down into the atmosphere when you farm this way. So, regeneration, just think that's the good stuff. Climate term number 6, circular economy. The circular economy is similar to the term zero waste. You might have seen the term zero waste on social media, so let me explain it here quick. In a zero waste world, there's no garbage, there's no litter, there's no need for landfills. Everything would have a way to be repaired if it got damaged, so you wouldn't have to just throw out your new toys because they broke. Compost is a big part of a zero waste world. So is recycling. Let's take the example of a smartphone to really explain how this would exist in a zero-waste world. You buy a smartphone, you use it for some time, and then you get rid of it because it reaches its end of life. Now, the materials in a phone are typically some precious metals and glass, maybe even a little plastic. So what would happen in a zero-waste world is all these different materials would get sorted, would get recycled, and they would make new phones at a reduced price out of these renewed materials. And this reduces the need for mining new materials from the earth, which makes a better world for everyone. Climate term number 7, renewable energies. Now, this is an oldie but a goodie. These are things like solar, wind power, geothermal power, maybe even hydroelectric power. The main idea here is to get our electricity from things that don't run out, okay? We can pretty much rely on that there will always be sun, that there will always be wind and water to get our electricity from. So, an oldie but a goodie, but super important because these are getting cheaper by the decade.
Climate term number 8, fossil fuels. This is the enemy. When you hear fossil fuels, think bad, really bad. Think pollution and the source of global warming. Fossil fuels are what make our cars, our trains, our planes, and factories work. They were a really good source of energy that made our whole world function, until we found out that they make the whole world heat up. In very simple terms, fossil fuels are just old life. They are dinosaurs and old living things that have been buried under the ground for thousands of years. And about 200 years ago, we found out that if we dig for this stuff and burn it, it can make our factories and trains and planes go. But there's a catch. What is life made of? That's right, carbon. So, when we burn fossil fuels, we are essentially burning old life and releasing huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere.
Okay, at this point in the video, I just wanted to stop and pause so that I can mention something really important. So, now that we just found out that the cars and the trains and the planes that we go in are causing our world to heat up, you may be tempted to just never go in a car again. And that's fine if you want to do that. But I just wanted to mention that you're not evil for going in a car. The whole system is based on fossil fuels. So it's very hard, it's very, very difficult to get rid of your emissions, even if you tried. Stopping going in cars and planes and trains is going to be very difficult. So my personal view is a better way to deal with this sense of anxiety is to talk to your friends about what they're doing. Ask your friends if they're biking more because they're scared about climate change. Ask your parents what they're doing to reduce their emissions. A better way than just never concentrating your energy on never going in a car again, a better way to deal with that is to educate your friends on what's going on and ask them what they're doing to reduce their carbon footprint. All right, let's keep going.
Climate term number 9, sustainability.
Whew.
Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about sustainability. So, you may have heard this term before, but what does it all mean? You could say sustainability is the complete opposite of fossil fuels. It's a way of life that doesn't produce garbage, doesn't harm the planet, and benefits all life. It's not a utopia where everyone is happy and there are no problems. It's more a way to live that doesn't harm the planet. It's living with nature as opposed to against it.
Climate term number 10, eco-anxiety. Okay, so eco-anxiety is the feeling you get in your stomach when you learn about all these stuff and you don't know what to do. You learn that fossil fuels have been invented 200 years ago and they're still causing the world to heat up and no one's talking about it. So, I recommend a mixture of taking action and breathing exercises. So, the taking action thing doesn't have to be huge, it doesn't have to be going to a protest and holding up a sign, and no, it doesn't have to be that. It can be as simple as talking to your friends and family about what they're doing to decrease their carbon footprint, if they're biking more, if they're walking more, just anything you can do to get this out into the open more. Breathing exercises to help with your eco-anxiety. I recommend the app Headspace, I'm not sponsored by them, but I definitely recommend it. There's also Calm and Insight Timer.
All right, so for this week's call to action, we're checking out the EN Roads Climate Simulator. So, what this is a very seemingly complex, but actually very simple simulator that simulates the average global temperature. See this right here? The average global temperature increase that's going to happen by 2100, the year 2100. So, the temperature is in Celsius, and if you're not used to that, you can look at the Fahrenheit below. So, in 2015, world leaders from all over the world gathered at what's called the Paris Climate Accords, where they agreed that they were going to pursue efforts to keep the global temperature increase no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what does this mean? This means that world leaders gathered in 2015 and they agreed that, okay, based on what's happening at the Paris Climate Accords in 2015, all the world leaders agreed that, okay, the world looks like it's going to heat up a little bit, but let's try to keep that heating to 1.5 degrees on average so that we can pursue efforts to then decrease global temperature and get it back stabilized right after that. Now, why is it showing 3.3 degrees Celsius as a temperature increase rather than 1.5? Well, it's because we're not on track. But we can do things. That's the attitude of this whole channel, and that's the attitude I'm taking into this. We can do things. Now, to do things, you can drag these sliders over here, and you can see that they do different things that cause the global temperature to decrease or increase. Now, these are all, you can go very in depth into these. You can click the 3 dots and you can get even more details in there if you really want to go in depth, but I recommend you play around with this and see what all these different sliders do. You can also see on the left the global sources of primary energy. So depending on how we slide these things are going to change. If we increase renewables, then renewable energy is going to increase. If we tax coal, then the coal is going to decrease. And this all has effects on the global temperature. So going into 2100, see what you can do to get the temperature down to 1.5 and then share your scenario right here.